Okay, I'm wonderful. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna share my screen real quick, um, just to make sure people know that you're in the right spot. So this is for the awardees of this year's Utah Pollinator Habitat Program. So you all have been notified that you will be getting pollinator kits for your respective landscapes. So first of all, congratulations. Um, this is a lovely photograph of well, this was a greenhouse a couple years ago. But so before we go too much further, this is a quick preview of what we're going to do. I'll go over that again, but I just want to cut to our guest speaker, Joe Wilson. He is calling in, my goodness, from France, where he is studying bees. And I'm going to stop sharing so he can share his presentation with you all and get you all excited about pollinators and bees. So, um, great. Joe is muted. Let me see if I can.
There.
See.
It,
There we
it
go.
wouldn't
Perfect.
it wouldn't let me unmute. There was too many parental controls or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And I assume you can see my screen. Is that true? Okay. So, yes, I have to give you some caveats here. I have not gone through my slides to see how long it takes. So I'm gonna take 15 minutes, right?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay. And I'll just give you a little bit of background. So I am Joe Wilson. I'm a professor at Utah State University. We have a Tooele campus of Utah State. That's where I'm located normally. Right now, I'm in southern France studying bees. I've been here for about a month, and I go home at the end of this week. So it's 2 o'clock in the morning here. So if I say something weird, that's why. Uh, And here we go. We're just going to jump right into it. So I'm going to give you a brief little presentation about bees. Um, for some background here, in the United States, everything east of the Mississippi River, there's about 750 bee species. In Utah, we have about 1,100 species of bees. So to put that into context, that's about 25% of the bee species known from the US can be found in the state of Utah. That's pretty impressive. We're kind of a hot spot of bee diversity. When I talk, I mean, when I say bees, people have lots of different things in mind. I'm gonna tell Minnie to mute herself. Let's see if I can make it. Nope, I can't do it. I hear feedback from your computer, Mindy. Um, So when people think of bees, they think of a lot of things. Out of all these bugs on this screen, only one of them is a bee. So before we can talk about bees, we have to talk about what a bee is not. So a lot of people confuse bees and flies. So if we were in person, I would have you yell out what the differences are between bees and flies. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to show you what the differences are between bees and flies. And I do this because I see this a lot of times on the news or on advertisements. People say something about saving the bees, and they have a picture of a fly. There are a lot of flies that look really similar to bees, but there are some key differences. First, let's look over here at the bee on the right. Bees have pollen collecting hairs most of the time on their back legs. And bees have kind of these longer antennas and kind of regular sized eyes. That is in comparison with a fly. Flies do not have pollen collecting hairs. They usually have skinny, thin little legs. Flies have really big eyes. You can see the eye of the fly is filling kind of half of its head. And then flies, especially the flies that look like bees, usually have really short antennas. So I usually tell my kids, look at the face, and you can tell if it's a fly or a bee. So we are not going to be talking about flies today. We're talking about bees. So one other thing that people often mention is flies only have 2 wings and bees have 4. That is a true scientific fact, but it's not that useful because when a bee or a fly is flying around, it's hard to count its wings. So it is a fact, though. Okay, so now we know bees and flies. What about bees versus wasps? So bees and flies can be kind of distinguished fairly easily because they're distantly related. They're not very closely related to each other. So there's lots of physical differences. Bees and wasps, on the other hand, are close relatives and they can look quite similar. Some things that you might notice between bees and wasps. Wasps have often skinny waists. You can see in this bottom left corner, that one has a really skinny waist. Wasps have thin legs. They don't have those fat pollen collecting hairs on their legs. They have thin, kind of spiny legs. And mostly, most wasps overall are not very hairy. So that works pretty well for people. Some people say wasps look mean and bees look nice. I can agree with that. These wasps are kind of mean looking and the bee is kind of fuzzy and nice looking. But one of the problems with telling bees from wasps is that some bees look really waspy. For example, all four of these insects on the screen are bees. You might be thinking, well, wait a second, that one on the top left is a wasp for sure. Well, it's not. It's actually a bee. So not all bees are fuzzy. Not all bees are cuddly looking. So how do we really tell them apart? Well, physically, it's really difficult, but based on their behavior, there are some key differences. The difference is basically their diet. Bees are herbivores. They eat pollen and nectar and feed their babies pollen and nectar. Wasps are carnivores. They feed their babies meat. Mostly that comes in the form of other insects. So this is a wasp on the right. It has killed a katydid, and now it is bringing little bits of katydid back to its nest to feed its babies. So wasps generally are meat eaters. Bees generally are pollen eaters. And that kind of can make some connections between some of the physical features that we notice. The thin, spiky legs of a wasp help it carry its prey back. The fluffy legs of a bee help it carry its pollen back. So there are some physical differences associated with their diet, but even, I'm going to go back a slide, even these other four bees that look waspy, those feed their babies pollen, which makes them bees. Okay, so now we know bees and flies, we know bees and wasps. Let's talk about bees. When most people think of bees, they think of this bee right here. This is a bee that I call the European honeybee. In Europe, they call it the Western honeybee. Either way, this is one species of bee, and people know about this species of bee. It lives in a hive. It has a big queen, and it has worker bees, and they communicate, and they have this really fancy society. What people don't realize is this bee right here is not like most other bees. It is the black sheep of the bee world. Black sheep meaning it's different than most other bees. It doesn't mean it's bad, it's just not the norm. And so when we make the mistake thinking that honeybees are what bees are like, we might be making mistakes when we're trying to help bees. Most people don't realize that most bees are solitary ground nesting bees. So if we pull that apart, that means they are solitary. They live by themselves. They don't live in a big hive. There's no queen and worker bees. It's just a single bee. And most of them nest in the ground. So these ground nests can have different kind of architecture. Some of them are just a little hole that you might not even recognize. Some of them have a kind of a pile around them like an ant hill might. Some bees even build a little chimney around their ground nest. Underneath that nest is a long tunnel and little rooms that the single female bee digs. She'll bring pollen and nectar into those rooms, and those are her little nursery chambers. So there's no queen, there's no workers, and in fact, there's no honey involved with these solitary bees. This is how 70% of the bees in the world live, including most of the bees in Utah. Other bees that don't nest in the ground are solitary cavity nesting bees, is what we call them. They find pre-existing holes in a piece of wood or other places like that, and they reuse those pre-existing holes to make their nest. For example, this bee right here is called a leaf cutter bee. She has cut a piece of a leaf using her mandibles, and she's bringing that back to her nest, and she'll use it kind of like wallpaper. Inside her nest is a long tunnel, and she makes these little leaf rooms. Each one of these on the bottom here, each one of these is a little leaf surrounded room. She brings pollen and nectar into that and lays an egg. So that is her nest. Also a solitary bee, no queen or workers, and no honey involved. This is how most bees are, including most of the bees you'll find in your yards. And so now I want to introduce you to several different groups of bees that are fairly common in Utah. this is the leafcutter bee, so I'm not going to reintroduce those, but there's lots of other kinds of bees. In the spring, one of the most common wild bees we have is called a mining bee. In the US, there are 71 species of these. I have 3 new because there's new species being described all the time of mining bees. Mining bees get their name because they are all ground nesting bees. They nest in the ground. A single solitary female bee digs the nest, and that is her nest. There is one species of mining bee in Utah that's out right now, and they specialize on sunflowers. So they will only visit sunflowers. So you might see mining bees in your yard. They're I'm going to go back a slide. They're quite diverse. Some of them are metallic, some of them are yellow, some of them are gray, but they are solitary ground nesting bees. A relative of mining bees are the fairy bees. These are my favorite kind of bee. These are in the genus Perdita. I love them because they are super diverse and they're super cute. So in Utah, this is actually, I took this slide from somewhere else. In Utah, there's over 100 species. In the US, there's over 600 species of these fairy bees. I really like them because they're some of the smallest bees in the world. This is one on a quarter, so you can see this one's about 3 millimeters, maybe 4 millimeters long. Cool little bees. These ones are out mostly in the summertime in Utah. They like it when it's hot. Another kind of bee that you might see around your yard is called a digger bee. As the name indicates, they dig. There's several species of digger bee. They're not as diverse as some, but they look kind of like fast gray bumblebees. Digger bees are solitary. They dig in the ground. And so unlike the bumblebees, they hover and dart around really quickly. So you'll see digger bees around various flowers in your garden. There's one special kind of digger bee that was just recently discovered in the last, I don't know how long it was, maybe in the last 10 years now. This lives in southern Utah, and it actually builds nests in the sandstone. It will chew into the sandstone to make its nest. So the old bees have actually worn down their mandibles chewing into this soft sandstone in parts of southern Utah. Another common bee is one that people love are called bumblebees. These are one of the few truly social bees in the US. Bumblebees do have a queen and they do have worker bees, but unlike honeybees, they don't have a big hive with honey. Honeybees have about 20,000 bees in their beehive. Bumblebees have anywhere between 24 to 200 bees in their nest. Bumblebees build a nest underground in abandoned rodent burrows or other places like that. I guess I should be checking the chat. Let me just see if I'm missing anything. Oh, good. People do have bumblebees at their house. Ooh. So bumblebees, also unlike honeybees, bumblebees start a new hive every year. So in the spring, a bumblebee queen comes out of hibernation. She collects pollen and nectar, goes underground in this rodent burrow that she usurps, and she starts a family. So she has lots of daughters, and those daughters become the worker bees. And these worker bees will do the collection of pollen and nectar and build the hive through the summer. Then in the fall, they make new queens. Those queens go out and hibernate and everybody else dies. So it's an annual colony. Somebody asks about plain black bumblebees, if we have those in Utah. We have a different bee that I'm not highlighting here. It looks like a giant black bumblebee, but it's actually called a carpenter bee. They chew into dead pieces of wood and make their nests there. In northern Utah, we have one species of carpenter bee. In southern Utah, we have 2 additional species. They're quite large, like a big bumblebee, but instead of covered with hair, their abdomen is kind of black and shiny. Depending on what part of Utah you're in, you'll see different kinds of bumblebees. Along the Wasatch Front, we see a lot of these ones with the orange stripe on them or just these yellow ones. I put this mostly black bumblebee here, Bombus occidentalis, because this one has become very rare. In the 1970s, it was one of the most common bumblebees in the western states. Now it has lost about 90% of its range. Parts of Utah still maintain healthy populations, but this black bumblebee, Bombus occidentalis, might be listed as an endangered species soon. Oops. Can't click my thing. Another bee that we have that has a strange common name, it's called the polyester bee. These are bees in the genus Calides. they get this weird name polyester bee because they are solitary ground nesting bees, but in their underground nest, they actually line the nest with this plastic-like substance that they secrete from their abdomen. This plastic-like substance is actually a natural polyester. That's why they're called polyester bees. But they actually, it looks like maybe like plastic wrap, like that you put over your leftovers, kind of a flexible plasticky thing. So unlike most bees that collect mostly pollen for their offspring, most bees will leave a little pollen cake. These bees collect pollen and nectar, but it's heavy in the nectar, so it's more like a pollen soup that they're leaving for their babies. And so that plastic lining for the nest waterproofs it and keeps that pollen soup fresh for when the baby hatches, and it actually floats on top of the pollen soup and eats it. So those are polyester bees. A close relative of the polyester bees that doesn't look like the polyester bee at all has lots of common names. This is the genus Hyleus. It's called a white-faced bee or a masked bee because they have these white faces. These bees are super interesting because they look a lot like wasps. They actually don't have pollen collecting hairs like most bees do. This is the only genus of bees in the US that doesn't collect pollen on the outside of its body. It actually will ingest the pollen and then regurgitate it when it gets back to its nest. So kind of like a bird would do to feed its babies. You know, it ingests it, then barfs it back out. These bees will nest in hollow stems of plants. So like they, especially like raspberry bushes or blackberry bushes, where the stem has been broken or cut, they will kind of burrow into that pithy center of the stem. So anyway, those are the white-faced bees. They're fairly small, kind of a variety of sizes, but they're small little bees that look kind of like little black wasps with white faces. Another group that I consider one of my favorites are called the mason bees. These are in the genus Osmia. These are probably some of the most famous wild bees that people are more familiar with. The blue orchard bee is a member of this mason bee group. I like them because they are brilliantly colored. Not all of them are, but many of them are these bright metallic blues and greens, even kind of purplish hues in them. There are some black ones too, but they're amazing bees. Mason bees have been called like the jewels of the desert because they're common in the deserts. They're also pretty common in the mountains in Utah. They're usually flying in the early spring, but you can see as the sun hits them, they just shine like a little jewel. They're called mason bees because they use mud to line the inside of their nests, like a brick mason would, I assume, is what people are thinking there. So this is a mason bee collecting mud. There are some companies online that will sell you, they'll sell you dirt. They call it mason bee mud. Um, I I am not a member of these companies, and I don't think that it's worth buying mason bee mud. Mason bees just need mud. If you water your grass at all, there's plenty of mud for the mason bees to use. Mason bees naturally live in dry Utah, and they are able to find mud where they need it. So one misconception that people have about bees is if you look online, there's lots of kind of instructions on how you can help bees. People say make a little bee bath by putting marbles in a bowl of water for bees to drink. All of these wild bees that I've mentioned so far don't drink water from puddles. They actually get all of their liquid that they need from the flowers that they visit. So putting water out for bees only helps honeybees and some invasive wasps. Mason bees might be one of the exceptions, but they only live in areas where there's going to be mud anyway. So anyway, don't buy mason bee mud, and you probably don't need to put watering things out for the bees. So there's a bunch of different kinds of bees. People often ask me, well, these are interesting, but do they pollinate? I've already mentioned they don't make honey. So people kind of get confused about why we care about them. So let me give you some little statistics here. Yes, they pollinate. And in fact, some of them are really good pollinators. This is 100 honeybees. Studies show that in an apple orchard, 100 honeybees can do the same amount of pollination as 2 mason bees. So yes, in some cases, these wild bees are way better pollinators than honeybees. Honeybees are important, and we have built our agricultural system around them, but more and more studies are showing that the wild bees are doing the majority of pollination in many instances, especially in smaller gardens, like the kinds of gardens or orchards we would have in our yards. Some of the reason they're so efficient, some of the reasons wild bees might be so efficient is because of some of their behaviors. This is called a squash bee. It's called a squash bee because this bee only visits squash flowers. That includes pumpkins and zucchinis and things like that. So because she is a specialist, she only visits that kind of flower. She is a really good pollinator of squashes and zucchinis and pumpkins and things like that. Another reason some wild bees can be really good for our gardens is wild bees are able to do something called buzz pollination. Tomatoes, tomatillos, eggplants, those kinds of flowers that we have in our garden, honeybees don't know how to pollinate them. This is a tomato flower close up. There's no pollen exposed. The flower is built in a weird way, so honeybees can't get to the pollen. Wild bees have this ability to buzz pollinate. They actually unhook their wings from their wing muscles and vibrate their body, and it causes the pollen to come out. Studies show that you have more tomatoes and bigger tomatoes on your tomato plants when you have wild bees that are buzz pollinating. Here's a little video of buzz pollination. I'm just going to briefly, nope, I was going to try to briefly show it, but I can't figure out how to make it play. So what if I click? No. You have to look at my social media for it because I don't want to break it. One last bee that I will highlight. This bee has lots of common names. It's in the genus Diadasia. Some people call them cactus bees. Some people call them mallow bees. Some people call them chimney bees. Diadasia like to nest in hard-packed soil, so we often see them nesting in the middle of trails or in dirt roads. They are cool because they nest in a colony. They are solitary bees, but they nest in a big neighborhood. So they find a patch of dirt that they like, and they build these neighborhoods. You can see all these little tunnels are the chimneys, which marks the entrance to each little bee nest. I've seen in a dirt road down near Moab, I saw one of these that had thousands of nests in it. Just a cool bee. They're called cactus bees or mallow bees because different species in this genus specialize on different plants. There's one that specializes on sunflowers. There's a few that specialize on cactus. Most of them visit globe mallow, which is a great bee plant. Okay, so I forgot to time this, but I'm guessing that's around 15 minutes. We'll see. I have various social media and I maintain it in various ways depending on how bored I am. So you can follow some of that stuff on social media. It's mostly Instagram and Facebook at this point. But Mindy, do we have time for questions? I'm going to say we do because there's a question I want to answer here in the chat.
Yes.
Thank you. Someone says, Joni says, I've heard that you should keep some soil free from ground cover of any kind so ground bees can nest there. In fact, that is true. Ground nesting bees, most ground nesting bees prefer to nest in bare soil, bare sunny patches of soil. And this is kind of tricky because people don't like bare dirt in their yard. Like bare dirt often attracts weeds. But if we can find a way to landscape around, leaving some bare dirt, maybe that's in between pavers, maybe that's in the corner of our yard, ground bees will nest there. If you water it occasionally, that's fine. The bees will still nest there, but the more you water it, the more it will get invasive weeds there. In my yard, I do take a hoe and I'll hoe off the surface periodically to keep it weed free. As long as I'm not digging way down, the bees are nesting anywhere between 3 inches down to 3 feet down. So if I just scrape the surface weeds off, it seems to be okay. I also use a drip system in my garden, so I'm not watering those bare patches of dirt. Someone else asked about raspberry stems. Are there specific bees? Let's see, what bees are particular to raspberry canes? So I talked about the white-faced bee that will nest in the raspberry stems. There's also another small carpenter bee. It's related to the big black carpenter bee, but it's small. It's in the genus Ceratina. Let's see. So we talked about soil. When should we start working in the spring? For bees, the first bees come out kind of in mid-April usually. But I don't know if that's what you mean by when should we start working in the spring. That might be a question for Mindy. Tons of bare dirt in St. Joy's. Ground nest. I'm just reading some of these comments. And so people often wonder about, so the idea here is if you build it, they will come. If we plant pollinator-friendly yards, the pollinators will come. Sometimes people get concerned because they put in pollinator-friendly landscaping, or they leave bare patches of dirt, or they might even make a bee hotel, those little sticks bundled together, and they don't see wild bees at first. It can take a little while. Bee communities naturally fluctuate a lot from year to year. In fact, a baby bee can stay in suspended animation in its underground nest, some species for up to 7 years before it comes out, because our habitat here also naturally fluctuates. Some springs is really dry and hot, and some springs are really cold and moist. And so the natural bee communities have evolved to fluctuate with the fluctuations that we have. So I didn't really talk about bee hotels, but bee hotels are one way we can provide for cavity nesting bees. There's some research that suggests it could be bad. Some research suggests that it might be okay. In nature, these cavity nesting bees nest in dead trees or dead logs. Most of us don't keep dead trees or logs in our yard anymore. So there's not very much nesting site in our suburban landscapes for these cavity nesting bees. A bee hotel is a block of wood with holes drilled in it, or a bundle of reeds bundled together. Cavity nesting bees will nest there, but just like we learned during COVID, if you pack together too tightly, you spread disease faster. Bee hotels are reducing natural social distancing, and it can spread disease faster among those bees. So there's kind of this balance here. If you don't have a bee hotel, there might be zero nesting opportunities for those bees in your neighborhood. If you do have a bee hotel, if it's too big or too concentrated, you can be artificially reducing the social distancing, and diseases and parasites can spread. Someone asked if there's natural enemies of bees. There are a lot. There are wasps that parasitize bees. There are other bees that are actually parasites. There are beetles that will parasitize them. Honeybees have more natural enemies than the wild bees do. So you might have heard of mites with the honeybees. None of those mites will attack the wild bees. Somebody, I just noticed in the chat here, somebody asked about wasps. Wasps are actually really good for our garden. Wasps are natural pest control. Most wasps, because they're predators, most wasps hunt the garden pests, caterpillars and grasshoppers and aphids and things like that. So wasps can be mean if you get too close to their nest, but they are not bad for our yard, and they actually are accidental pollinators, just like butterflies are at times. Let's see. I'm just going to look through some of these comments real quick. If I leave space designated for bees. Oh, solitary bees will nest close together. There are some studies. So in these bare patches of dirt, if the bees decide to nest there, there's one study that showed in 1 square meter, there was 7 different bee species nesting in that 1 square meter.
Wow.
So yeah, they can nest together. And in our yards, they often do. Bees do not really like, I'm just going through the comments again. They don't really like sagebrush. Sagebrush is a wind pollinated plant. Honeybees will visit it. Most of the solitary bees won't visit it. They won't visit it for pollen, at least. The wasp enemies for bees are a solitary wasp, and you'll see them in your bee hotel. The family is Sapidgidae, but they're not the wasps that we're used to seeing with those paper nests. Someone asks if I'm an entomologist, and I do wear entomology hats at times. My degree is in biology. I have a PhD in biology, so I can call myself lots of things. I call myself an entomologist, an evolutionary biologist, an evolutionary ecologist. It all depends on the audience. But yes, I am trained in entomology. Someone asks about leaving the stems of sunflowers after we chop them. And generally, this is true for most of our flowers. Most flowers either have pithy stems or hollow stems, which can provide nesting for bees. So if you deadhead the flower at the end of the year, so you're just cutting the top of the flower off and leaving the stems, bees can nest in there. The problem if unless you're going to leave those stems until the next summer, then it's not going to be beneficial. So what I kind of tell people sometimes is deadhead the flowers. Then when winter comes on, cut those flower stems at the base and bundle them together and set them aside in your yard, because there might be bees nesting in those. That includes things like sunflowers, but other things too. Most of our flowers can provide hollow stems for bees. Let's see. What size of holes to drill? Somebody asks for the bee hotel. Uh, Different size diameter holes will attract different sizes of bees. Online, most of the instructions are for a one bee, the blue orchard bee, which uses bigger holes. But so anywhere between a half an inch and a quarter of an inch, well, even maybe smaller than that, various sizes will attract various bees. Some of the bees that will nest in these pre-existing cavities are only, a quarter of an inch long, so they will nest in pretty small holes. Um, I don't know the answer to this strange question. Do wasps hunt Norway rats? I don't think so. Um, but how many times have I been stung? I avoid getting stung. It is my job to not get stung. I do catch lots of bees every summer, and I have since I've been in France, I got stung once by a kind of they call it a sweat bee because it lands on your skin and drinks your sweat. I was catching it up at the tops of the mountains. I'm studying bees on lavender right now, and there's wild lavender at the top of the mountain, and I was trying to push it in from the net into the little collecting vial, and it stung me. Most wild bees can sting, but most of them are very reluctant to sting. They're not protecting a giant hive like honeybees are. So while they can sting you, they really rarely do unless they like get stuck in the collar of your shirt or if you grab them and shake them or something like that. I don't recommend grabbing and shaking bees. Uh, maybe,
One one
yeah.
more question. How many bee species have you documented using showy milkweed to date? Is
Uh,
it popular?
200. Yeah, so I usually have a slide about that. I actually did that study. So, showy milkweed is something that people often plant for monarchs because it's food for monarchs, both as larvae and as adults. And I did a broad survey looking.
Uh-oh. Uh, just to let you know, Joe is in France again, and he said that his internet went out on him at midnight last night. It's 2 a.m. there right now, and he might have just lost it. So that's too bad. I mean, we could ask him questions all night, and he would know the answer to every single question. So he is that knowledgeable about bees, and he's so passionate about it, and it's very catchy. So that's why I wanted him to speak to you all tonight. Um, yeah, I think we lost him. So, sort of an unfortunate end to his presentation, but that means I can go on with mine. Can everybody hear me and okay, and see my screen? Does it look like okay? So good. So I'm gonna keep going here. We did say, well, there's a couple of notices out there, 6 to 7, 6 to 7:30. I'm gonna try to blast through this because I think most of um, people are interested in sort of the question and answer session that we will have at the end. So I will do what I can to get through this. And let me see, why is this not? Oh, there we go. Okay, so we will be talking about the program in general, summarizing it, the goals, where and what we're growing out in 2024, talk a little bit about site preparation and maintenance. Managing expectations is a big one. Um, uh, Finding information on the website, maybe we can poke around in there for a little bit. Plant pickup spots, there's some news on our Logan spot that we sent out that is going to have to change. Additional resources, and the most important, the Q&A, questions and answers. So I should have said this, I am Mindy Wheeler. I am, my official title is Native Plant Conservation Project Leader, kind of a mouthful, an employee of USU, but I'm based at the DWR, Division of Wildlife Resources here in Salt Lake. These are our committee members. I think most of our committee members have UPHP after their name in the chat or in the participant list there. I'm not going to name all these folks in the interest of time. So the Pollinator Habitat Program started as a result of Ashley Matthews introduced a bill in 2021 called, it was House Bill 2224, Pollinator Pilot Program. So it was meant to last for 3 years and 3 years only. We got enough participants and interest that it has been it is now funded through 2026, but we are now, this year, we're going to go to the Utah legislature and ask for ongoing money to continue this program. So we're not having to plan in 3-year stints. I'm hoping that this program will continue. What Ashley Matthews wanted, and there was a Senator Vickers, I think I want to say, that also co-sponsored it. Was public education and outreach, as Joe was talking about. Pollinators, bees, butterflies have sort of been in decline lately. And so we want to do what we can, and that means all of us, to help those populations rebound a bit, because boy, do we need them. They are really important for our foods and as well as for the ecosystem in general. We decided, they sort of left it wide open as to what it was going to be. So we decided that we wanted to distribute pollinator-friendly native seeds and plants, and emphasis on the word native there. The other thing that the legislature wanted to see was that the state would cover 25% of the cost of the project, provided that our awardees would cover the other 75%. So in coming months, after you get your plants in the ground, there will be a survey, yet another survey that we will send out to you, asking you what your input is to the project in terms of labor, in terms of irrigation supplies, just again to show the legislature that yes, we are meeting, our awardees are meeting our 75% cost of the project. And we really have had no problem meeting that so far. Southern Utah University has also received some funding to help with education and field research on pollinators. They've been keeping that up. So they are also involved. Okay. Summary and goals, I guess I think I feel like I've covered most of this, but we really want to establish and enhance quality habitat, just so we can get diversity begets diversity, right? So the more diversity, plant diversity we get on the ground, the more insect and pollinator diversity will follow. And like Joe said, it might take a while, but it does happen. Our goal was to put 90,000 native plants in the ground and about 18 million native seeds. My guess is that we might have reached that already in this. Let's see, this will be the 3rd year. We will most likely reach that. We do have wetland and upland habitat specific plants for both southern and northern Utah. You guys know that since you put in your applications. And again, we really want to speak loudly to the legislature this year to make sure that this program is continued and funded. So why the focus on native plants? It mainly comes down to our locally adapted insects. Like Joe says, so many species in Utah, they have adapted to our native vegetation here in Utah. So we're just hoping to carry that forward and offer our native insects their native food and shelter and grounds for them to live their life and flourish. And of course, we really want to make sure that our pollinators survive, because again, they're sort of the base of the food chain, and so many other things rely on our pollinators on up the food chain in our ecosystems. The reasons pollinators are facing declines, there's a loss of habitat, there's pesticides, there's competition and invasive species, there's climate change that's going on, that the heat, man, it's been rough. And then as Joe mentioned, that we do sort of concentrate on the native bees because A, they are such good pollinators for so many of our native plants. Um, and that's where we want to concentrate. But again, beekeeping is certainly very important. It's just that the two can compete for the same resources. So we're just putting our efforts into the native side of things. So, and then this, sorry, that's not, it's a little out of focus. This Doug Tallamy has done a lot of work and research on what native plants have to offer versus maybe some of the things that are very similar, but yet they've been sort of crossed and crossed again from in the horticultural world. You know, that he had, anyway, he had a statistic about a native oak that provides 60% more food and shelter than an introduced oak. And I think this was in California, but he uses a lot of really great examples in terms of let's keep native because that's what our insects are best at flourishing on. So onward, again, congratulations on your Plant Kit Award. I'm excited for all of you to start on this journey. And it can be a journey. You'll get hooked. I'm pretty darn sure. So this year we are using the State Correctional Facility out in Northern Salt Lake because they have built 8 brand new state-of-the-art greenhouses that can grow a whole bunch of plants. They are growing about 85,000 plants for us this year. And they grew out plants for us the first year. They did a great job. Took them a little bit to get used to their new digs since they moved the prison from Draper to Salt Lake. But they really do a great job. And I guess a horticultural program is a pretty we'll say competitive one to get to work within the prison. So we can all feel good about that too. Some really great skills coming out of that. So, oh, so we had 486 applicants this year. We awarded to 366 of those. So I think that's about 70% or so. So we're doing better on satisfying the demand. However, the plant kit request, of course, was 4,500 and we were only able to award 2,400. So, and we did get applications from 23 out of the 29 counties this year. So what will a successful project look like? Well, I'm going to skip down to the bottom of this slide right here. Well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So you can make it look like what you want to make it look like, right? So if you're one of those that really likes the neat little pods of different species, that's great, go for it. Maybe you're more of a Darwinian gardener where you sort of put things out there and see what survives and let things creep around as they will. So with these native plants, it can take quite a long time for things to sort of equalize. So, be patient with it. Don't give up on your starts. Keep looking for those, get those tags in the ground with the names on them. So hopefully you can come back to them. I would say at least 3 to 5 years to really see what's going to evolve in your landscape. So again, diversity begets diversity, and it's really fun to see all the different bees, the butterflies, the hummingbirds, and moths, and the wasps. So site preparation and maintenance. Weeds, I tell you, weeds are just a fact of life. My goodness, they're just always there wherever they're. Anyway, I've just been dealing with a lot of weeds lately. Although we do avoid the use of weed barrier again because of those bees that need the bare ground to nest in. So and I'm finding the person that had this house before us used weed barrier, and it just has worked its way to the top over the years. And now I'm just ripping it out, making a mess out of everything. So again, mulch is great. You can use leaf litter. to protect the ground a little bit. But again, a lot of those native bees like fair ground to build their nests. We like to avoid the use, well, certainly of pre-emergence. Some of those are pretty active in the soil. Um, and I have not kept up on it, and maybe this can be a chat thing, but in terms of a lot of the big box stores generally like to use neonicotinoids, which is a pesticide used in the growing of some of their plants, which is very systemic pesticides for bees and insects. And it's so I like to try to find to be that very annoying customer and try to find the nursery manager and ask, does your grower use neonicotinoids? And you know, uh, hopefully they know the answer. And yeah, and if they don't, maybe go a step higher too and find out who their grower is. Anyway, um, so irrigation is going to be important. It all works, whether you hand water, a sprinkler, a drip system, overhead sprinklers, they all work. Just try to figure out, we do have some tips on irrigation when you first get your plants in a minute here. Managing expectations, again, reaching equilibrium, if there is such a thing in nature, right? Reaching equilibrium in your landscape can take a long time. So just be patient. You might be surprised in a couple of years in terms of what shows up, and hopefully you haven't lost all patience and dug it back up or dug that area up again. Don't give up on those starts. Um, so yeah, I wait longer. Let's see. So yeah, the other thing, these pollinator kits are meant to have something blooming throughout the entire season, right? So your pollinators will have something to eat and nest in and whatever throughout the growing season from spring into the fall. So um, yeah, many things to remember and keep in mind when you're trying to look for what you planted as well as what you want when you're actually putting them in the ground. Navigating the website. Hopefully you all have gotten onto this website. It's got a lot of information on it. Just keep clicking around. Hopefully you'll find what you need. We can get into the website if we have time for that to poke around on it. But we do have, let me see if it's next one. I'll get to it in a minute. But we do, so there's PDFs about each one of these species that we have offered or will be offering up there as well. Let's see if, okay, yep, this is a example of those PDF sheets. This is Dusty Penstemon, gives the wildlife supported, how big it gets, how wide it gets, tall and wide. Its natural distribution in the Western United States, a little bit about propagation, et cetera. So you can find all sorts of information about each one of the species in our kits up on the website. And this is also up on the website. We have the maintenance and planting guide. Um, Again, some really good information, really good specific information on here to read through, to consider before you put your plants in the ground. Design layout considerations. And again, this is, everybody's different. Everybody's going to want a different look. So just things to keep in mind in terms of how long and when each species will bloom. And again, that's up on the website. How tall and wide will they spread? I have found the fire chalice, Zauschneria, boy, that thing creeps around quite a bit. So it likes space. But if you like it, you can let it creep away. So the other thing, um, a lot of these pollinators, they like, room to, and I'm going to say it, spread their wings, right? So they like to have a lot of space to access the plants that they're after. So don't necessarily plant things too densely because sometimes that makes those plants inaccessible for some of those pollinators. So you can plant in groups and keep them a little bit further apart than you might think, and have sort of different edges from which those pollinators can access those plants. And again, here we are again, provide access to exposed ground for ground nesters. Also, we do have, and maybe some of you know this already, we do have a Pollinator Habitat Program group page on Facebook. Post your questions there. A lot of times other awardees or past awardees, we also watch that Facebook page. We can answer your questions there. And then the other thing is Google and Pinterest have a lot of ideas, and you can search around there for ideas in terms of how to set things up. But again, you know what you like mostly, right? So just, have fun with it, I guess. Be creative. So we did put this example garden. This is an example layout for the specific plants that we have been giving out. And I think I'm looking at these. Most of these will be part of our habitat kits this year. And again, it has some great layout, great ideas and tips and tricks. And this can also be found up on our website under, I think, additional resources or something of that nature. Weed management, I think we talked about this a little bit, but boy, it's a fact of life. I tell you, that bindweed is just, oh my gosh, it is just unrelenting. If somebody could monetize bindweed and how fast it grows, they would be a very rich person. And I keep thinking of ways like, anyway, maybe like fried bindweed leaves or something that taste really good, or maybe they have a really good medicinal value. Anyway, um, so yeah, refer again to the planting guide and maintenance. One of the most important things, though, is really try to get to know the weeds in your area, in your yard, just so you can recognize them throughout the growing season. You can recognize the little tiny leaves as well as its flowers or whatever, so you know what to pull and when. And again, this is what Joe was talking about in terms of the hollow stems. Leave those because bees really like those to nest in. I thought his idea was great if you want to cut them down to the ground and then put them somewhere in your yard instead of throwing them away, because there could be some nesting bees in there. Watering frequencies. It's going to be different for different plants. Well, when you first get them, we recommend every other day for the first 1 or 2 weeks. And of course, it's going to depend on what the weather is doing and whether we get any rain. And then just keep lengthening those waterings over time. And then hopefully you should be around watering once a week until things go dormant in November, December, again, depending on the species. One important thing, though, is penstemons, globe mallows, and we found that northern sweet vetch just do not do well with extra water. I have a lot of friends that think, oh, just pour more water on it. Looks like pour more water on it. Well, penstemons really don't like that. If you look at their native habitat, that's just not in their bailiwick, I guess, for, I don't know where that word came from. Anyway, let's see. So plant pickup locations, I did not get a chance to look at how many people have responded to our latest survey in terms of where you want to pick up your plants and when. The northern counties will be Saturday, September 14th. There will be one in Logan, one in Park City, and one in the Uinta Basin. The Park City and the Uinta Basin locations are set, and we'll be communicating with you about that. The Logan one, we found out today that the teaching greenhouse will not be available. So we will be communicating with those who want to pick up in Logan where that will be. There's other greenhouses, hopefully, that we can set up at. Central counties, so anything around Draper. So that'll be Draper, September 21st. That's usually our biggest distribution day. And that's at the Lone Peak Conservation Center. That's near the old prison site in Draper. And yeah, that's a full day of getting plant kits out. Southern counties, there will be on October 5th in Moab and in Cedar City. And these are the locations in Cedar City. And again, we will be communicating with you about that closer to distribution days. There's some additional resources. I'm not going to go through these, obviously, but this will be on our website after this recorded. So the other thing I wanted to mention, I meant to mention this at the top, but we had a Zoom bomber last time. So those of you who were asking questions about the Zoom meeting at the today, that's why we're like just a little bit careful, because Zoom bombers can make things rather difficult and uncomfortable, or both. So those of you who haven't answered your survey yet in terms of where you want to pick up, whether you want a sign, I think Becky tells me there's a lot of questions about the contract. So you can go ahead and print that contract out and sign it, and then scan it back in and send it to us. Or you can go ahead and just print it out and bring it back to us when you pick up your plants. But we really do need that contract signed, hopefully before you pick up, but certainly on the day that you pick up. And those of you, Becky and others would know better in terms of how many this has happened to, but please do make sure if we have had difficulty communicating with you, there was a couple, anyway, that we have your correct email. There was a couple that our software didn't catch that it was not a viable email. So we missed a couple, but thankfully caught them at the last minute. So those of you who have had trouble, please ensure that our emails will not go to your spam box. Okay, I think I am going to stop there. 7:02, that's good. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I guess,
Mindy, can you hear me?
yeah. Yep.
So we do have a question that maybe you want to touch on. People are wondering, what 30 plants looks like. How much space do they need in their truck to haul those home?
So, maybe I skipped that part. So most of our plants this year will be grown in the 10 cubic inch tubes, which are the tubes that are maybe 8 inches long and about 1.5 inches around. And so a lot of your plants will come in those. There are a few species that will be coming in 4-inch pots. And then there's a couple of deeper pots, but 30 plants generally in those tubes can fit in a 1 foot by 2 foot tray. So usually what we have done in the past is we give those trays out. Let's see if I can find a photo of it. So I'm just going to share this really quickly.
And can I jump in, Mindy, for just a
Yep.
sec?
Sure.
So one of the things we may ask of you before your pickup is just bring some little gallon, pots that your trees or shrubs come in, because we can poke those tubes down in there, and then you're not worried about bringing trays back to us. They're quite expensive, and we do like to reuse them from year to year. So that's helpful if you have just gallon size pots that you could bring. Also, because they're in tubes, you may not be used to planting. We grow them in tubes so that the roots are very deep. native plants like to grow really deep to, root structures, which is beneficial. You don't have to water as much, and they're reaching down to the water, lower water levels. But it might be a little harder to plant. And so we do have a tutorial on our Facebook page on how to remove those from the tubes. That's very handy. You just kind of roll them on a hard surface, and then you can kind of pop them out with like a stick at the bottom, or like pencil-sized stick. And if you are so inclined, you could also purchase like a little auger that attaches to your drill. That is really handy, just to like drill the holes the proper depth in your landscaping. It's very inexpensive on Amazon. It's not suitable for every kind of soil type. If it's very rocky, it's a little bit harder to drill down. But if you have like a nice loamy soil, it makes the work go a lot faster, and you can get those roots down to the level they need to be.
Great. Yeah, I just wanted to show this is a tray, and that I think each of these trays can hold 98 plants, right? If they're all in tubes, they can hold 98 plants. So technically, that could be your 3 kits right there. But again, some of our plants might be in slightly different sizes, so it might be a mixture of things. So, and these are the trays that we like to recycle and have you guys drop them off, and we'll take them back and reuse them. It's a lot of plastic. I gotta stop sharing again. So I don't know, I can try. Those of you who have been watching questions, are there questions? Let's see. More information on preparing for the plants. Ideal conditions. Oh, Jen answered that one. Anyway, try to get rid of as many of those weeds as you can. Yeah, let's see. Oh, yes. Somebody mentioned a fabulous resource for Doug Talamy. He's also did the Homegrown National Park. He's really great on that. Joe is, if you Google Joe Wilson, you can find his social media stuff. I think he's pretty active. Oh, somebody answered that too. Maybe instead of me going through these, are there others that people haven't? I'm gonna maybe go down to the bottom of the questions.
Mindy, there's been a lot of questions about when people will know what plants they're getting. So maybe you could touch on that.
Okay. Yeah, I did. Of course. Let me go back to. Okay. So, it's 30 plants. So each kit is 30 plants, and I think most of you got a minimum of 3 kits, so 90 plants. So these are the species that we are offering this year. There's a few missing, of course. So generally, it's unfortunately hard to say exactly, because there are some species that are a little more difficult to grow. And so we, like the sulfur flower buckwheat, I tell you, sometimes it's really easy. This year, they got them to germinate, and as soon as they transplanted them, they're losing half of them after they're transplanted, right? So hopefully we'll have enough, but a lot of these you may receive up to 3 or 4 or even more of one species. And then there's a couple that you might receive 2 or 1. So like the fern bush down at the bottom here, we did have a lot of fern bush last year, and I think that was one of the things, like it's hard to find a spot for 6 fern bush, but those who wanted the 6 fern bush certainly got them. So I'm sorry I can't answer that question more specifically at this time. But if you look on the website for the Northern Upland Kit, Northern Upland and Wetland Kit, and the Southern Upland and Wetland Kit, you can pretty much count on getting most of those, maybe 2 of each, maybe up to 4 of some species. Hopefully that helps. And again, I'm sorry, I can't be too much more specific at this point. I've asked for another plant count of each species from the prison. Hopefully I should have that soon and I should have a better idea. And we can keep in touch about that maybe through the Facebook page or yeah, maybe some other method to help you guys plan. And I understand that it's kind of difficult to plan when you don't know exactly what you're gonna get, but we're doing our best. So hopefully.
Another popular question, Mindy, is do you recommend a soil test before planting? A lot of people have hit on that. So maybe you could just repeat and then also talk about weed pressure and the importance of keeping that down.
Yeah. Okay. So uh soil tests. You know, not necessarily. These aren't agricultural crops. The only place that I would be a little concerned is if you are in sort of a depressional area where the soils get really saline, like really close to the Great Salt Lake, sort of in that really saline old Bonneville bed soil. I'm trying to think. I think, there might have been a couple of people in that scenario, but most of you really, I don't think would have that really highly saline soil. Um, so I'm not sure, unless you think you're in a really big depression that, has a lot of evaporation. I'm just not sure it would be worth it, frankly. I mean, it's good to
Mindy,
know. Yeah.
I was just gonna add, so if they can grow tall fescue in their yard, they're not gonna have too high of alkalinity or salinity in their soil. So if they're growing tall fescue already and their trees aren't dying, they should be okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good bar to set there. Thanks. Um, let's see, weed pressure again. Yeah, we um sometimes anyway, probably a little too late for this tip, but if you plan on turning your entire lawn over, I would try to get rid of it twice. Like, get rid of the sod however you want, and then wait maybe 3 months and get rid of those weeds that may be coming up in between it. Nature hates a vacuum, and things are going to find its way in there. And so, if you have the patience and the time and the planning, I would try to clear it, or hopefully you have cleared it already and are sort of waiting for what shows up and try to clear it again as best as you can, because some of those weeds have, well, as we all know, very good persistence and very long seed viability in the soil. So,
Mindy, can I ask a question?
sure.
Do you have any specific guidelines for planting these pollinators in the Bear Lake Valley?
Specifically, not necessarily. I think it's you know, my take would be, well, decide on how large of an area you're going to do. One thing, well, try to get to your question first. I think it's kind of going to be up to you. I mean, I think the best that we can do, other than, you know, maybe getting some help from somebody within our program. We're hoping that we can maybe get some people from UDAF to come out to some sites to try to take a look at it and just maybe give a little extra tips. Another way to go about it, I guess, and again, it really depends on what you're looking for, but you know, take a walk in a natural area that you really like and take notice of what's there and what sort of patterns, if there are any patterns, and try to mimic that as best you can. But again, I don't know if that's what you want or not, or whether you're looking for a beautiful landscape, right? So it's, I'm not sure I can really give you tips on specifics, I guess.
Okay, we're not looking for a beautiful garden. We're looking to plant pollinators to attract bees to alfalfa.
So you have an agricultural alfalfa field close by?
Right, yeah, it's about 150 acres of alfalfa.
Alfalfa, okay.
And this is an old log cabin right on the edge of this farm that we're planting the pollinators around.
I see, I see. Yeah, so I mean, I in that case, maybe I would put you know, around your alfalfa field as much as you can. I mean, it to get them established, it's going to be a little bit of work in terms of getting those, making sure that they're getting enough water to get established. Again, that sort of, you know, ask yourself the question in terms of, well, how many kids you're getting, what kind of water you want to, what kind of water you're going to have to take to them to keep them alive, and what's feasible, I guess, is another sort of question that maybe should be asked in that scenario as well. But I would, if you're trying to attract them to the alfalfa, I would certainly plant, you know, around that field as much as you can.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Mindy, I'd just like to jump in with a comment and ask you if this is good advice. But for a lot of these site preparation questions that are very site specific, maybe they should just call and get a hold of their local extension agent, whether that's a horticulturist or an agronomist.
That is a resource certainly that that can be used, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a lot of USU extension folks that you know their native plants as well as yeah, we're so anyway, with the growth of this program, I think it's going to be a question asked more often is where can we get some more specific help, and we're hoping, since this program is based within the Department of Agriculture and Food, that we can get some of their conservation, what are they called? Conservation planners available for you all as this program develops. Thank you for that, Cody.
I have a question about, I guess, so I have some fruit trees and they have some, I've only had, one, so I have an apple and a nectarine and a peach. And my nectarine has some like little tiny bugs on it, which I would like to somehow treat for or prevent. But I'm worried because everything that I've looked at has like perethrins and stuff in it, which I don't, obviously it's not flowering anymore, but I still don't really want to spray it if it's going to harm any other bugs. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Gosh, boy, I wish Joe were still with us. I don't know what kind of bugs they are, which and again, maybe that's a good extension agent question. They know a lot about pest control, so maybe they would be, if you can take them a photo of the bug that you're most worried about, and tell them your story, maybe they can have a few suggestions for you. I have aphids here, and I can't. There's not enough ladybugs in the world to get rid of my aphids, so sometimes I just spray it with water, and sometimes a little bit of soapy water, and but again, that's just aphids. I don't know what type of bug you're looking at to try to at least decrease, I guess. So I would point you to your USU extension folks, because I think they're pretty good about, you know, keeping in mind pest control while you have, you know, some fruit trees in your yard that you are definitely interested in keeping. So Sorry, can't give you too much more than that.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's probably aphids, so we'll see how it
Okay.
goes.
Yeah, and yeah, I have a bunch of aphids on my aspens up here, and I get a lot of satisfaction out of just spraying them with a jet of water. And I think it helps somewhat, but you need to do that on a regular basis. So just something to keep in mind.
I know we are encouraged to maybe ask our extension folk for site specific, but my site is a wild site, and I'm the one that I have um, 1,000 plants to put in, and most of the area that I'm planting is wetland, and it's true wetland. It's covered with sedges and calyxes. How much do I have to open it up? Because the original plan was to use a tractor that would rip down about 2 feet down to loosen the soil and open up an area about 6 inches wide, but would actually fold back in as you put the plants in.
Hmm.
Is that going to reduce that competition? Because there is a calyx and sedge dominated site, but that's all there is. And that's why
Right,
we'd like to get something other in the wetland there.
right,
We
right.
need to bring in a scalper or a deep mow plow or something. And if I do that, I'll
Um,
have to probably use a small caterpillar.
yeah, I don't know if I would go to that degree, but I think your first thought is a good one. Do you have wiregrass out there?
Yes, I have wiregrass. So I have
Yeah,
the rush that I have is wiregrass, and then the sedge. The wild horses have always clipped that off so short. I've never been able to ID it. I
yeah.
just now have the area finally fenced off, and so we're controlling
Okay.
livestock, the wild horses, and even some of the game species. Um, but I just didn't know how much we had to loosen and open that up for the species that I'm receiving.
Right. So the wiregrass, frankly, would be the one that I would be most concerned about. If you want to plant in that wiregrass, I would scalp quite a bit. That root system is just unrelenting, and I there's part of me that has a sort of a love-hate relationship with wiregrass. But if you do plant in the wiregrass, I would definitely scalp as much as you can and try to create somewhat of a hole to break up that root mat, because that's what it is. It's a root mat under that wiregrass. And and if your carices are bunch carex, not rhizomatous carex, I wouldn't worry about it too much. But if you have something like carex praegracilis, which is part of the wetland, you might want to open that up a little bit more. So once you sort of get a better idea of what carex you have, um, whether it's rhizomatous or just a bunch carex, that should give you a better idea as to how much you really want to or need to open it up. Does that help? That
Yes,
the
that helps.
wiregrass is just yeah, okay. The wiregrass is just it's really tough. It's as you probably know, the cows don't like it. They don't eat it. And so it is just taken over a lot of our wetlands. I mean, it's a native rush, that's great, but it does not allow for much diversity in those wetlands. So if you're going to be dealing with the wiregrass, do your best to move that aside and break through that weed or root mat as much as you can.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that project, Scott.
I really hope it works because I have another one a little bit further south that could use some TLC.
Okay, well, we'll yeah. I can't I am looking forward to seeing it. So Are there other questions out there? And again, all of you can have our email, the group email, and I'm not even going to attempt to look through these messages because I'm thinking,
People are talking. Can you hear me okay?
yep, yep.
People are talking about augers and stuff. Wouldn't we normally, when you plant a plant, dig a hole that's a lot wider than the plant to loosen the
Yes, and
soil around it?
that's something, right. And that's something I did want to mention. Some of those augers can go straight down, and sometimes you're lucky enough to get that root mat directly into the hole. But yes, I think it's going to be better if you can open up that hole a little bit more to make sure that the roots get in pointing down and deep enough. So
And we're going to loosen the root ball up like we would do anything else.
yes, I think that does help too, to loosen up the roots before you plant as well. I'm so excited for all of you. Yeah, I just
I have
yeah.
one suggestion
Uh-huh.
is to contact your representative or senator, whoever passed the bill, invite them out to see what it looks like now and as you have planted, and then maybe in the following year, let them see the progress of it. That way they will have some investment into and knowledge of what the bill is.
Yes, that's a wonderful idea. We are putting together something to submit to the governor's budget, I think anyway, it's a process. But we are hoping to put as many photos as they will allow, like before and after photos as they will allow for those for that request. So, but that's a great idea. Yeah. Hoping to get more people out on the ground and seeing some of these projects. Is this program still USDA and Forest Service sponsored? So this program is sponsored through the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. And so it's actually direct state funding. We have gotten some extra funding from the BLM and the nonprofit arm of the Fish and Wildlife Service. This whole thing started, well, a lot of it got going because of the monarch butterfly and its decline, and hoping to bring those populations to a stable point at least. So, because it's been suggested to list it under the Endangered Species Act, and it puts a whole new set of rules on the monarch butterfly. So, tour would be fun. Are there other questions? Few butterflies. There is a Todd. Oh, somebody else help me out. Todd. It says the Stout. Um, he is in the midst of writing a book called Utah Butterflies, or anyway. Oh, and I do have a poster. I think that did he put this poster together? Hang on.
Yeah, he's got a poster of the butterflies of Utah.
It's,
I believe it's for purchase.
Yeah, it
On
looks
his
like
website.
that. It's very large. I've been meaning to put it up on the wall, but Todd Stout is very knowledgeable about butterflies, and he's almost always willing to talk to people about it. He did do Utah butterfly field trips. I don't know if he's still doing that.
He's still doing that, and he's got a Facebook page. So if you're interested in learning more about butterflies, you can join that. And he posts pretty much constantly throughout the summer with different species information, and then does guides or like tours for groups for free up in the canyons all over Utah.
page, our page, is it the Utah Pollinator Habitat Program group page on Facebook?
I'll put it up on the chat, but yeah,
Okay.
it's a group page.
And where can people get that butterfly poster? Is that through Todd himself?
Yeah, you'll have to go through Todd.
And Todd Stout and his uh what's his company name? Or does he have a
It's Raising Butterflies.
Raising Butterflies? That's right. That's right.
I think its website is raisingbutterflies.org .com.
Great. Thank you. Hey.
Their Facebook.
Todd also kind of runs the Utah Lepidopterist Society, doesn't he?
Okay. Great. Yep, he's very knowledgeable. Anything else for the time being?
I posted, there was a lot of questions about sharing photos and before and after pictures. I posted the website for the Facebook group page, and there's tons of shares on there and pictures from other participants in previous years for anyone interested in joining.
Yeah, we're still trying to select bunch of those off of the website or off of the Facebook page for our ask to the governor's budget this year. So post away. Put those photos up there for us. Okay. Okay, sorry, people are answering. Point drip or inline drip preferred. To me, that kind of depends on your plan. What I have done is I get those little, it's on a drip line, but it's a little overhead sprinkler, tiny little thing, and you can open it up and it sprays more area. You can close it down to spray less area. But I put it on I'll say a long leash, and so I can sort of move it around and have it water different areas. And again, this is as sort of your landscape matures, but yeah, I think it kind of depends on your design. I think both inline and the other method point will both work.
Is the expectation that after a few years we wouldn't need to water them because they're native?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'm looking at all of these and yeah, they should be fine without water. And again, sometimes like I've been cheating a little bit on my landscape just because it's been so darn dry. I want to see something, and so I do sneak them a little extra water sometimes. So, but it's still a lot less water than a bluegrass lawn. So, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So.
And it is important to water them just through establishment. Once they're established, they kind of take care of themselves.
Get them nice and comfy in their new home. $7:33. I think maybe we'll stop there and again, feel free to reach out with questions or thoughts, and I'm sure we'll be in touch with other surveys, and as we get closer to distribution days, we will definitely be in touch with you. So,
thanks, Mindy. This has been great.
Good. Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and I'm very excited for all of you, and wish you the best with your pollinator kits.
Bring on the bees.
Indeed.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Okay, thank you. Good night.